Welcome to a conversation today on self-employed income with two of our self-employed commercial business specialists. Ladies, please introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Sam Walker. So I am an ex-big banker, including some time spent in small business, doing a lot of commercial lending. I absolutely love self-employed applicants and working with clients that are a little bit tricky or have some unique circumstances.
Hello, I'm Carly Pitt. I have also come from big bank land, and prior to coming over to being a broker, I worked with small businesses as well. So really excited to be a broker now and be able to look at more than the one bank for those small business clients.
Great. And ladies, what sort of length of time did each of you serve within the banks before you came over?
Well, I know you can't tell, but nearly 20 years in the big banks.
So when you were 4, you started. Excellent.
Exactly, yes. So the last kind of 2 of those years were predominantly in the commercial banking.
Yeah, I spent 15 years at the same bank, and with the last 4 of them being in small business.
Wow, so 35 years between you in Bankland before you came over to broker. 6 years specialist, self-employed in commercial lending. I love it. Okay, so first of all, who should consider themselves self-employed? What does it mean to be self-employed? Like, it obviously can be a wide range of people. So who's self-employed?
Yeah, absolutely. You running your own business, really. So there's a lot of different structures that you can have for being self-employed. So we have our sole traders, we have companies, we have trust structures. But yes, essentially you're operating through an ABN and you're running your own business.
Yeah, so if you're not employed by somebody and you have your own business, you are self-employed. Whether or not you're paying yourself a salary from your company, you are a self-employed person in the eyes of us and the bank. So we just need to make sure that we're getting all the correct documentation when you are your own boss.
Cool, so give us an example of some of that documentation, maybe a quick checklist of what someone who's self-employed should be trying to bring to an appointment or send to us beforehand.
Yeah, so the banks generally, as a general rule, will want you to have had your ABN for 18 months or up to 2 years, because they'll want to see 2 full years of financials. Where that can differ is if your business is lending money, but that's a whole different kettle of fish that we'll look at other options. But if you are just a self-employed person who wants to borrow to buy a home or an investment property, then the bank's probably going to want to see 2 years, but there are some options when you've got 1 year financials and tax returns. They're going to want that notice of assessment, so it shows that those tax returns have been submitted. And depending on where we are in the time of the year as to how dated those tax returns can be, but obviously we'll always want to see the most recent tax return.
Okay, great. And as far as complexities, what are some things that people who are self-employed need to be aware that can cause, issues? So something that pops to mind is maybe late tax debts or things like that. Is there anything else that jumps to mind that can make self-employed lending a little bit more tricky than, say, someone who's employed by someone else?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that our self-employed applicants typically work really closely with their accountants, and one of the best things your accountant can do for you is minimize your taxable income. So what we're looking at when we're analysing the financial statements and the tax returns you provide is not only that bottom figure that you've sent through to the tax office for your assessment, but also any of those other accounting add backs that you might have there on your tax return. So things like depreciation, things like interest that you're paying for on any debts that you've got, and lease payments and things like that as well.
And as far as those conversations that people might have with their accountants, I know you'd like them to chat with you and their accountant early on, not coming to you straight away when they're looking at doing something. What are the important conversations with the accountants going to look like as they're coming up to wanting to lend?
Yeah, so a really good tip is that if you know that you're wanting to lend money this year or next year, is just to engage with your accountant and us as early as possible, so that we can kind of give you some tips and let you know, and the accountant know that you're going to want to be lending money, and it's really important that you have as much income coming through your individual tax returns if that's what's needed, so that we can really get your capacity up to where you want it to be.
And finally, what does low doc and full doc mean? Those are some terms that are commonly heard in self-employed lending. What's the difference between those?
Yeah, so full doc I think we touched on earlier. So it's your 2 years tax returns, including if you're operating a company, your company tax returns and financial statements as well. Low doc is something that we speak to people about quite often, because we'll often have people that might be changing from a pay-as-you-go job and starting up their own business, and they're really keen to understand how long they need to wait until they can borrow, or it may be somebody that's expanding their business quite rapidly, and we're seeing changes in that year-on-year income, and we want to be able to use the kind of more trends for their income rather than our actual historical information. So low doc allows us to look at that. Typically what we'd be looking to see is a minimum of 6 months of trading through your ABN, and some ways that banks would validate that would be through BAS statements, bank statements, or self-declarations that are signed off by your accountant. So again, really important to have a great relationship with your accountant as a self-employed person.
And quite often, as opposed to, say, a standard PAYG employee, how closely do you guys work with people's accountants? Is it quite different?
Yeah, so we try to obviously call out or reach out to the accountants if and when we need their input. Depending on how tricky a situation or how convoluted your income structure is, we might actually need the support of your accountant to say, hey, can you put a one-pager together so that clearly explains to us and the bank where this income's all coming from and how it's being drawn down on. So the best thing you can do is have a chat with us so that we can either have a chat with your accountant directly with your permission, or we can all be involved together.
Perfect. And one last question that I have not briefed either of you on, and I can see the deer in the headlights look that's going to come at you. Can you think of anything in the past or recently that you've been involved in financing from self-employed commercial or business side of it that's an interesting, has anyone financed, I don't know, like a circus or anything wild, weird, wonderful or wacky?
I don't know if it's that wacky, but an exciting deal I've done recently is for a person purchasing a business, and they've worked in a very, very similar, basically run business exactly the same. So he wanted to take the leap into purchasing his own business, doing exactly the same thing. My old guy working with big banks said, oh no, I don't think this is possible, you don't have enough security, but then we were able to come up with an option. So I guess that's a good win outside of big banks. They might be able to offer you a better rate or something like that, but if you have an opportunity now and you want to explore it now, we can look at some other non-banks who will help you now.
The perks of having 30 plus lenders on panel to be able to go and workshop situations with. What about you, Sam? Anything funny that comes to mind from the past or interesting?
Yeah, so I think just an example for me of where a low doc application can work really well in action. So this particular example was an occupational therapist. She'd been working as a pay-as-you-go employee for over a decade, so she had a lot of experience, but had only gone into her own business in the last 12 months. Was keen to buy her first home, had a great deposit, wasn't ready to go with a more traditional lender. So on that basis, we were able to have a look at her bank statements and BAS statements and put together some information to do that as a low doc application and get her across the line with her finance, which was really wonderful.
So what you're both telling me is no circuses yet.
Not yet.
Okay, awesome. All right, thank you for your time, ladies. And if anyone has any questions, they can come chat with Sam or Carly, two of our self-employed commercial business, I call them big brain specialists, ready to chat with you at Uploans.